the darkness beyond Pluto trembled. It started as a thin fracture in space, a shimmering wound in reality itself. Then, with a soundless roar, the gate yawned open. What lay beyond was not just the void, but something far worse. Commander Elias Vance watched from the bridge of the Solstice, Earth's last remaining deep space reconnaissance vessel. His hands tightened around the cold metal of his console. For years, the anomaly had remained inactive, a relic of a war long fought over. But tonight, the gate was awake again. "All stations, report," Vance commanded, his voice sharp despite the unease gnawing at his gut. "Unidentified energy signature is stable," came Lieutenant Rena Mori's response. It's massive, sir." The Solstice's long-range scanners flared to life, feeding back data at a terrifying rate. Swarms of signatures, moving in formation. The gate wasn't just open, it was a doorway. And something was stepping through. A deep hum filled the ship, resonating through the hull like a warning from the universe itself. The shadows beyond the gate shifted, forming jagged silhouettes. Then, the first of them emerged. A vessel unlike anything Earth had ever seen. Black, spined, bristling with weapons that pulsed with violet energy. It dwarfed even the largest of humanity's warships, its mere presence an announcement of dominance. Vance exhaled, his breath fogging the glass before him. "They're back," he murmured. "And they're not alone." The alarms blared. The war that never truly ended had just begun again. The void stretched endlessly, a silent abyss where the remnants of war drifted like frozen tombstones. Shattered hulls of forgotten battleships hung motionless, their twisted frames glinting under the dim glow of a dying star. Somewhere beyond, the gate loomed, a colossal ring of alien metal, floating at the edge of known space like an unhealed scar. It had been silent for years. Dead. A relic of a war that had left entire worlds in ruin. But tonight, it pulsed. The energy around it crackled, casting eerie violet arcs across the debris field. A deep hum resonated through the emptiness, a sound that could not be heard but was felt, a pressure against the mind, a whisper of something waking. Beyond the gate, the last human stronghold drifted in uneasy silence. A fortress in orbit, its defenses scarred from battles long past. Lights flickered in its corridors, where soldiers patrolled with weary eyes, their rifles held too tightly. They had been waiting. Dreading. Knowing that peace was never meant to last. Further below, a world lay shrouded in darkness, its surface marred by craters and silent ruins. The air was thin, the sky a canvas of swirling storm clouds that carried the echoes of 1,000 lost voices. This was not Earth, it had never been home. Just another place to stand, to fight, to survive. And yet, the war had never truly ended. Now, as the gate trembled and the void beyond it twisted into something unnatural, the truth was undeniable. The silence before the storm was breaking. The owners of the gate were returning. And this time, they would not leave until nothing remained. The tremor in the deep space station grew stronger, like a pulse of electricity coursing through the bones of the ship. The crew felt it, each one a pawn in a game they hadn't fully understood, yet knew had no way out. For years, humanity had lived in fragile peace, rebuilding from the ashes of the last conflict. The war against the unseen empire, the ones who built the gate, had scarred them all, but the worst seemed behind them. Or so they thought. Now, the gate was alive again. The hum from its ancient structure shook the foundations of the station as it reached out with its strange, foreign energy. Everyone on board could feel it in their chests, a suffocating pressure that seemed to pierce through every wall. Commander Vance's hands hovered over the control panel, his face set in grim determination. "All stations, report," he ordered again. On the bridge, there was no response except for the soft whine of failing systems. The crew members were frozen in place, eyes glued to the viewport, where the shadows from the gate grew longer. Something was coming. Something huge. "What is that?" Rena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just the gate opening, it was the fleet that followed it. Endless rows of warships, black as night, their designs too perfect, too alien to comprehend. As they slipped through the gate, they moved with a cold precision, synchronized like a well-oiled machine. The sight made something deep inside every human aboard the station clench with fear. The sudden realization struck like a hammer: Earth had been a target all along, the peace just a lull in an endless war. The universe wasn't done with them. On the outermost perimeter of the station, the first wave of attack ships launched. The threat was not just from the approaching fleet, it was the fear of a devastating new weapon that could annihilate everything they had rebuilt. Something humanity could not possibly comprehend yet. Vance's eyes darkened as he stared into the unknown, the question hanging heavy in the air: how could they fight an enemy that had already known them for centuries? What if humanity's time was already up? The first explosion ripped through the station's outer hull, sending a shockwave of debris and twisted metal careening through the air. The lights flickered, and the hum of the ship was replaced with the shrill sound of alarms. Panic set in like wildfire. "Damage report!" Vance barked, his voice hoarse over the noise. "It's the communications tower. Direct hit. We're cut off from the outer fleet," Lieutenant Maury shouted. The realization hit like a physical blow. The fleet, their only hope of defending Earth, was now blind to the incoming attack. The Solstice, their one stronghold against the enemy, was alone in the vast, suffocating darkness. As the tremors of the second blast reverberated through the ship, the bridge fell into chaos. Crew members scrambled to secure systems, but each flicker of light was another reminder that the clock was ticking, and the enemy was relentless. The ships emerging from the gate weren't just weapons, they were a signal. A message that no one had been ready to hear. "Commander, look!" Maury called out, pointing to the viewport. The space beyond the gate was no longer empty. A massive, glowing beam of energy shot toward the station, its intensity blinding. It wasn't a weapon, it was a signal, a call. It felt almost like a warning. Then, without any further hesitation, it came. A wave of energy so pure, so concentrated, that the Solstice shook as if struck by a cosmic hand. The systems flickered and then went dead. The crew's weapons were useless, their defenses wiped out. And there, in the center of the wave, something moved. A figure, no, many figures, each standing tall within the energy field. The first wave of the enemy's assault had begun. The ship's screens flared to life, showing symbols no one had ever seen, words written in an alien tongue that seemed to burn into their minds. Vance's heart pounded. The time for preparation had passed. The time for action had come. The choice was no longer whether they would fight, but how they would survive. The Solstice shuddered again, but this time it wasn't just the tremors from the enemy's attack, it was the desperate scrambling of the crew. The once organized chaos had given way to an overwhelming sense of dread. They were trapped. The gate had opened, and with it, a wave of destruction had followed, stripping away their sense of control. "The shields are failing," Lieutenant Maury shouted, sweat streaming down her face as she frantically worked to stabilize the station's energy core. "We won't last another wave." Vance stood frozen, staring at the view screen where the alien ships hung like dark harbingers, their weapons charging with brutal precision. The fleet's numbers were overwhelming, far more than they'd ever anticipated. Even the most optimistic projections couldn't have prepared them for this. "They're coming. They won't stop until we're all gone," Vance muttered, his fists clenched at his sides. It was no longer a question of whether Earth would survive, it was whether humanity would even be remembered. An urgent tone cut through the tension. "Commander, the power grid is unstable. We're losing critical systems," another officer reported. Vance's mind raced. The first wave had already crippled them, but the second assault was approaching fast. The unknown alien force wasn't just attacking, they were wiping them out systematically. The station's defenses were insufficient, their weapons useless, and their only hope lay in surviving long enough to understand their enemy's purpose. In the distance, a massive object began to take form, a ship unlike any the humans had seen before, its size unimaginable. As it drew closer, the gravity of the situation struck harder. If this vessel made contact, it would mean the end. Earth's last standing defense would be reduced to cosmic rubble. But the greatest toll was internal. The crew, once united in their purpose, were beginning to break. Fear clouded their judgment, and doubt began to creep in. Could they win? Should they even fight? Or was survival the only thing left to hold on to? Vance gripped the edge of the console. There was no turning back now. He knew the cost. Every decision now was a life or death choice. The stakes had escalated beyond comprehension. The enemy wasn't just at their doorstep, they were already inside their minds. The deafening silence was broken only by the distant hum of the colossal alien ship now fully emerging from the gate. Its form was a twisted labyrinth of dark metal, pulsating with an eerie, crimson glow. It was a fortress, an entity unto itself, and its presence dwarfed everything around it. Vance's gaze locked onto the holographic display, which flickered erratically as if resisting the reality it portrayed. The data streams were corrupted, feeding back the solstice was dying. The station groaned under the relentless assault, its hull splitting apart as fire and metal twisted in the vacuum. Emergency lights bathed the bridge in a crimson glow, flickering in time with the ship's failing pulse. The enemy's final wave was approaching, and there was nowhere left to run. Vance stood at the center of it all, battered, his uniform torn, blood trickling down his temple. His mind raced through every possible scenario, but the conclusion was always the same: there was no winning this fight. The enemy had come prepared. Humanity had not. A deafening impact sent him sprawling against the console. The screen flashed a warning: breach detected, main core compromised. He barely had time to react before the ship's AI sputtered its final transmission. Then the silence came. Not the silence of space, nor the eerie calm before destruction, but something unnatural. A stillness that pressed against the crew's minds like an invisible hand. The alien flagship, now fully emerged from the gate, sent a ripple through reality itself. Energy crackled in the void, bending light around its massive form. And then, they stepped through. Towering figures, their armor fluid like living metal, their forms shifting between tangible and something beyond comprehension. The crew froze as their minds were invaded by a presence that felt ancient, immeasurable, and utterly dominant. A voice, or something like it, resonated not in sound, but inside their very consciousness. You took what was ours. Now you will pay the price. Vance's breath hitched. He understood now. The war wasn't just about conquest, it was retribution. Humanity had built its future on stolen ground, using technology they never fully understood. And now, the rightful owners had come to reclaim it. But surrender was not an option. With trembling fingers, Vance activated the last override. The solstice's self-destruct system blinked to life. If they were going to fall, they would take the enemy's gate with them. The countdown began. 10 seconds to annihilation. The enemy stepped closer. Vance took one last look at the crew, at the people who had trusted him to lead. Then, he whispered the final command. For Earth. The screen flashed white. The universe held its breath. And then, impact. The explosion should have been absolute. A detonation of that magnitude should have torn the solstice apart, collapsing the gate in a final act of defiance. But as the blinding white light faded, something else remained. Silence. Drifting among the debris, remnants of the station spun weightlessly. The once proud human outpost was now nothing more than shattered fragments against the endless void. And yet, something stirred within the wreckage. Vance coughed, his body aching, his breath ragged as his consciousness flickered. He was alive. The emergency field around the command deck had held, barely. But survival meant little if nothing had changed. His vision cleared, and through the cracked viewport, he saw it, the gate. Still intact. The alien flagship loomed in the distance, undamaged. The detonation had done nothing. The sacrifice, the final act of defiance, had been meaningless. A wave of despair threatened to consume him. Had they lost everything? Was this truly the end? Then, movement. The alien figures, those towering beings of shifting armor and immeasurable power, remained at the heart of it all. But something was different. They were still watching. No more attacks. No more strikes. A transmission flickered to life in Vance's helmet. Not in sound, but in thought. A presence pressed against his mind once more. You chose to fight. You chose to sacrifice. Now, you understand. The meaning hit him like a freight train. This was never just a war. It was a test. A reckoning. A measure of whether humanity deserved to stand on its own. The gate pulsed once, then twice, before, for the first time, it began to close. The massive alien ships pulled back, retreating through the dimensional rift as if satisfied. The war was over, not in victory or defeat, but in judgment. Vance exhaled, watching as the last of the enemy forces disappeared beyond the collapsing gate. The weight of everything settled upon him. The losses, the destruction, nothing would ever be the same. But humanity had survived. And somewhere, in the endless dark, the gate would open again. One day. And when it did, they would be ready. The stars stretched endlessly before them, cold and indifferent. The wreckage of the solstice drifted silently, a monument to the battle that had nearly ended humanity. The war was over, at least for now. Vance sat in the emergency pod, staring out at the distant remnants of the gate. It had sealed shut, leaving behind nothing but the lingering energy of something ancient and far beyond human understanding. His hands trembled as he reached for the control panel. A distress signal was already broadcasting, but he wasn't sure what kind of world he'd returned to. Had they won? Or had they simply been spared? The question burned in his mind. The aliens had left, but their message remained, now, you understand. Understand what? That humanity was insignificant? That their survival had been a mercy? Or had this been a warning, one final chance to prepare before the gate opened again? A faint light flickered across the debris field. Not wreckage. Not a remnant of battle. Something new. A drone. Small, sleek, and unlike anything human engineers had ever designed. It pulsed with the same eerie glow that had surrounded the enemy ships. It wasn't retreating with the rest. It had been left behind. A gift? A spy? A challenge? Vance reached for the comms. Command, this is Captain Vance. The gate is closed, but we're not alone out here. I think, he hesitated, watching as the drone shifted, scanning the battlefield as if recording everything. Then, in a blink, it disappeared into the void. I think they're still watching. The transmission ended. The signal faded into the vastness of space. But one thing was certain, this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. If you think humanity's fight is over, think again. The gate may be closed, but the real question is, will it open again? And when it does, will we be ready? Subscribe, hit the bell, and stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Fire.